Well, hello, guys and gals. It's your buddy JT, and I've got a special treat for you today. Earlier this week, I had a conversation with Chris from Old World Exploration, and we talked about old world buildings, mud floods, great resets, Tartaria, really kind of questioning the timeline. Are we in the devil's little season? Is this evidence? You know what I think, but I want to hear what you guys think. Check this video out and tell me what you think in the comment sections, and be sure to check out Chris's channel, Old World Explorations, because he's got a wealth of knowledge and a wealth of content about this subject. Anyways, guys, God bless you. Love you.
Greetings, Old World Explorers. Welcome to another Old World Exploration Live with JT Follows JC. Welcome.
Well, thank you for having me on the show, man. I appreciate it.
I'm glad you're here. I've been checking out your content lately, and it's the old world's been popping up. So I figured I'd reach out and see if we could have a chat. So I appreciate you joining me and taking the time.
Of course, man. I said, yeah, it's funny. As we were chatting off air, that like I've been interested in this topic for quite a while, but like it's only been more relevant to the stuff I talk about until recently. I've put a few pieces together, but when I first started like making videos, I started to notice symbolism in things, and I was doing videos about like Art Deco buildings and just strange things. Like, what isn't that like that? People don't even like, they walk by them every day and they don't even question that building's weird. That's a weird statue. Like, why is that here? Why is there all this Roman architecture in America? These Roman gods, Greek gods, and stuff like that. Isn't that kind of weird if we're a colony of the British? And just asking those kind of questions, and it's kind of like then I'm going down another rabbit hole, looking at something else, and I kind of like put that aside and then come back to this. And it's like, but now when I really started getting questioned about the mud flood, so many people say you need to talk about Tartaria or the mud flood or whatever, and I'm like, I don't even know where to begin, and then. Or I don't know why it even matters. And then until you actually start looking into it and you realize, yeah, it matters a lot.
Yeah, and it's really strange too, because a lot of that architecture you're talking about, especially in the Americas, is like got like a short shelf life of a couple decades. It's like all of it squeezed into a short period of time. So it's not something I ever really thought about until fairly recently. So, and it's a really interesting topic. So,
well, right, it's like I think a lot of us have been talking about like, we didn't know what we were even looking at until recently. And so like I think that's why like you could, it's kind of like the whole hidden in plain sight topic of, wow, I walked past this every day. And I think that as a person living in the United States, and I live in Virginia, so I don't live that far from the capital, like cities like Washington, DC, or like I went for my buddy's 40th birthday to New York City.
Yeah.
And I remember the craziest part is when I was in New York City, we went down to the financial district, and we were going to go see like the 9/11 memorials and all that kind of stuff. And like the new One World Trade Center, which is obviously for us conspiracy theorists, that's a trigger. It's very, very triggering.
It's like an anchor point. It's an anchor
point. One World. Okay. Yeah. So, but the funny thing is like, I remember when I was walking, through, we walked forever when you're in New York City. And I remember thinking like the oldest buildings look the coolest. I remember thinking like, as somebody, like by trade, my family's owned a construction business for a long time. And I could just like, I was saying like, whoa, the American Express building, it looks really old, but for some reason that looks the coolest building I've seen out of all the ones here.
Yeah.
It looks like it's 100 years old. And I'm thinking like, well, they don't build them like they used to. And of course, like without any concept of what I was even saying, yes, very clearly they don't.
Yeah, interesting. Looks like my camera froze, so I'll just it's they have a different texture, different quality to them, I find. The old buildings, they're using stone, they're using brick, they're using almost all hardwoods on the interiors. Marble floors. All the materials are like what we seek out on the high end of things in our modern day. Things that take a lot of time, take a very skilled hand to construct.
Yeah.
it's like, how are they doing this so easily 150 years ago, 120 years ago? You know?
Yeah, I think there was a post, and I think it might have been on Instagram or something like that. And I saw somebody posted a picture of like New York City in like 1910, and of
Oh
course
yeah.
it's like it's just it looks so old. But then you look at the massive buildings there, and it literally like makes no sense to me. Like I remember thinking that, and I'm like, wait a minute, how did they build all that stuff? And then you like even stories like I think another thing that was blew my mind was like the Empire State Building.
Yeah.
So if you look on the timeline, is like I think they built that right around 1930 ish or something like that,
Yeah. In 1 year, I think.
in 13 months.
Okay.
And I'm
Yeah.
like, as a contractor, I'm like, well, how did they do that? I mean, obviously everybody sees the pictures of them like walking on like I beams, like with no
Mhm.
support or anything like that, and that's crazy. But at the same time, like, all right, that's still a lot of work to get done. I mean, just thinking about like digging into the ground, putting all the foundations and the footings and everything, and then building up and then finishing the inside as well.
Mhm.
I mean, that
Mhm.
is,
And
I
then,
mean, it makes no sense to
and
me.
these things are, then they're not celebrated, right? Like these a lot of this architecture is kind of swept under the rug as unsightly, overdone. You know, that whole Gilded Age is considered gaudy. You know, like a frivolous mistake, almost.
Well, it's almost like that whole thing where they like I feel like that with in the PC age where they deem like good things as bad things, where they talk about like what is it colonialization.
Hmm.
You know what I mean? Like that. Oh, those colonizers. So they would go. So especially like in South America, like the Spanish or whatever would build these completely amazing buildings down there, and it's like, oh, that's a bad thing because it's like it's colonialized now, and you're like, I don't think the people
Yeah,
there hate that. I mean, like obviously, I'm sure the oppression was bad, but I mean, like the building is not bad.
yeah.
Like
Well, the oppression is across the board, and that's what we sort of forget too. Like everyone's digging their way up out of the poverty, abject poverty from the last 150 years, really. You
right.
know, so people claiming oppression. That's the age we live in, right? That whole culture. But it is, you're right. It is a way to take the splendor away from that old world architectural majesty. You know.
Yeah, like what we're looking at right now, Penn Station. And I said that I think it's absolutely insane. So I believe that I looked on the timeline is that building only stood for like 50 years.
Yeah, that's right. 1910 to 1963. I have the Wikipedia page open here. So 53 years. Um, yeah, and I think they tore down 500 buildings, they say, to construct this here at the turn of the century, turn of the 20th century.
I mean again, like you look at that building, it makes like I said, it's yeah, like yeah, definitely when you zoom in, you realize actually how big it is.
Yeah.
And and when you see when you see the horses and buggies and stuff, I
Look at the
mean,
load this guy's carrying. Yeah. Sorry, go
I
ahead.
mean, it really is. It blows your mind because, like I said, you look just the bases of the columns are massive, and
Yeah.
that
It's a
makes
vast structure.
it makes no sense. It makes no sense. It makes no sense. It's funny how a lot of these buildings like that, and I went to, as I was telling you, I went to Washington D.C. recently. A
Hmm.
lot of them have that kind of like they make it even harder on themselves because they have this courtyard areas, like where you can see it's obviously the exterior wall built around the whole
Yeah.
thing.
Like here, too. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I mean. It's like that. I think that's very similar to a lot of buildings I saw in DC. And
Yeah.
like if you, I mean, gosh, it defies all reason that we would know that if you built a building like that, you would not, you would want it to stand forever.
Hmm.
You wouldn't build it like that if unless you wanted to stand forever.
And they were built to stand forever. And you know what I think? Looking at this here, I honestly think that a lot of what was once there has been removed. A lot of these flat roof areas. I think
Likely,
that I think it's been scaled. I've seen so many structures that have been scaled back, towers torn down, mansard roofs ripped off with a flat roof replaced with. You know, it's so I'm thinking a lot of these were scaled back from what they once were, and they were
I
much
think
more.
I think you're right on it because yeah, it does feel like that those especially
And
those
this,
where they have the gabled ends, those look like they had probably big domes there.
yeah,
I'm
like you
guessing.
don't stop here, right? Like you can see what's going on down with the columns, and then just like, okay, let's just chop it off flat and put this little. It doesn't make a lot of sense in my mind.
Well, it's
So
very similar to what we were talking about before. So we were talking about like, so I was telling you, I got into like John Levy's videos, and he was talking about the interior of this building, and he was comparing it to the Pantheon in Rome.
mhm,
And and he was clowning on obviously the Wikipedia, where it was basically like, oh, this building could have been built between like 1 AD and like 600. So it's like, so obviously they have no idea when it was built.
yeah,
And then he was showing the interior of this, where he was showing like the, I guess the the shape of the dome, like the architectural features on the inside of the dome,
mhm,
and like looking like this is the same technology. And what I see is like those ends with the gables, where
mhm,
like it looks like, yeah, it was scaled back. Those look very similar to what the Pantheon actually looks like.
mhm.
But you know what I mean? Like, but the Pantheon has a dome right there. I mean, it has a concrete dome, but I mean that's what that's kind of what it looks like.
Yeah, no, you're right. Yeah, so we can almost visualize what may have been there. You know, um, either that or they ran out of money and had to put a flat roof on.
Now, like I said, when you look inside there and the people look like ants, it
Yeah.
it's unfathomable. I mean, because you really think about it, like what was there was a couple of videos I was watching, and so the timeline says these buildings were built in a year or something like that, right? Or built in a year or two.
Hmm.
It and then it took longer to demo them than it took to build them.
Yeah.
And that, I mean, that's just like it's the most comical thing I've ever, like you can't take any of this stuff seriously.
Yeah, and it's the reason the Philadelphia City Hall still stands is because they were would have bankrupted the city to demolish the building in the 60s when they wanted to do it. So they decided, no, we're not going to bankrupt ourselves demolishing the old city hall.
Well, I mean, that's what I'm saying. Like they built them to last. I mean, again, you wouldn't build something out of stone like this to not last. And I think that's the thing that's probably tripped me out the most looking in this space, where I kind of thought I knew some stuff about this.
Hmm.
And then when Levy was kind of comparing like the technology, and he's like, this is the same technology. And if we don't know when the Pantheon was built, and then this building looks very similar, like the technology looks very similar. What
Hmm.
if they were built in a smaller, what if they were built in the same time period? And that actually like it kind of almost like melted my brain a little bit to
Yeah,
think
well,
about that.
what I think is I think there's a good chance that a lot of these structures that we consider to be old, like 2,000 years old, just suffered a greater damage than some of these other structures. I suspect that's a possibility, and they may all be from the same era. Yeah.
Well, right. I think that, yeah, I think that makes sense, because if you really think about it, like the only real difference between these, some of them look obviously more damaged, and some of them look like they were left in disrepair, and some of them were taken care of. But the one
Yeah.
thing I really noticed is, so if we really didn't have like modern cameras, I think until like around the mid 1800s, maybe like 18, I think 1812 or 1818, I think was something like the first like modern camera was invented.
So they
Suppose,
say. So yeah,
yes, supposedly.
yeah,
But when you look at the pictures from that time period, all the buildings look old. I mean, they don't, like, nothing looks new. And and according to the timeline, everything was built in the 1800s. So everything would have been this glistening, just white granite and
yeah,
marble and whatever. But it all looks aged.
yeah. That's that industrial revolution timeline that they're trying to squeeze into the 1800s for us. That's one of the ones that really tips me off too. Is like this doesn't make sense. It couldn't progress that fast everywhere at the same time like that.
You're right.
So that it's pretty illogical the way that they've put the 1800s timeline together. And I think that's why we're looking into this and poking holes in it, right?
Yeah, the 19th century is just like, it was like the best of times and the worst of times, right? Because like they were building all the best things, but everything was on fire. Everyone was at war. Like
Yeah,
literally, the America's at war with itself, and the British, and the Spanish, and the Indians, all at the same,
yeah.
all
Everybody's
basically, all at the
yeah,
same time, and yet things are being burned down. But they're also, that's not stopping them from rebuilding that stuff right away.
yeah.
Unbelievable.
The cities, yeah, the big Great Chicago Fire is one of the big anchor points in this field of research as well. It's like okay, the whole city burns down and they miraculously rebuild it in the next decade, and then it looks like it's been there for hundreds of years, just like that.
and it
You know?
still looks really old.
Yeah,
It doesn't look brand new, does it?
there's some weird stories with Chicago. Like they raised the downtown area. Have you heard of that? In Chicago, they raised all the buildings. Apparently, they say
They did. So how deep does it go down? I wonder.
it's. I don't know. It's ridiculous. Yeah. I wanted to show you. Are you familiar with the Broad Street station in Philadelphia?
I've probably seen it, but go ahead and show me again.
Yeah, that one there. So this is
Yeah.
a short shelf life as well. This one, um,
So what?
1881 to 1952. This one.
I mean, yeah, I guess. Yeah, I mean, it makes no sense. Was that a post office too? Because that kind of looks like the post office like page where
Here,
I was looking at. Yeah,
it's
I mean,
very
all the
very
post
possible.
office looked like that too, didn't
Yeah,
they?
Philadelphia was something else. I did a video in Philadelphia, and it just like it had me floored for like 2 weeks before I made the video. I had to kind of compose myself because I think there was a lot going on there. It was the capital, wasn't it? Philadelphia.
Yeah, Philadelphia was the capital of the United States until Washington D.C. was. So that's where they did the Continental Congresses, and so yeah, so then, but it wasn't that shortly after they moved it to Washington D.C. or was it, or maybe it was that's Nuremberg, but like
Yeah.
what? But yeah, like so yeah, I think Philadelphia seems like one of the best examples of some of these old world buildings lasted.
Well, I mean, you have to ask yourself in the 1880s, why are they doing stuff like this? Like, you've probably worked from heights before.
Hmm.
It gets a little nerve wracking once you get up over 2 stories. And you see these buildings that are like, what, this is like 10 stories tall. I'm not going to count it off, but and then you get up here and then this is how you're going to finish the top of this, you know? And
Well,
then you're going to go
the
home to your shack that you live in. Sorry, go ahead.
no, I was gonna say that when you look at like this roof,
Hmm.
I mean, obviously, based on what if the normie take would be like, if you just saw the top of it, you'd say that's a church
Hmm.
because that's what we're told cathedrals look like at the top.
Hmm.
But
And then
this is not a cathedral.
you go like that. You get
Yeah,
a
and
little
then you realize what is that? Then you would think it was a hotel,
bit. Hmm. I
right?
guess the hotel, yeah, it was the hotel for the train station. There's the train station attached to it right there.
Hmm. Yeah,
Right.
but I mean, yeah, obviously because there's so many windows, but at the same time, like that is I guess I just like I said, somebody as being in a construction company, and we do like my company has always done metal framing, drywall, and we've done plastering too.
Hmm.
But just say so I started doing like when I was in high school, I did a little bit with the trades,
Hmm.
but like the guys who basically trained me when I was coming up, like they all died basically. Or they're retired since then, and and now you know who replaced them? Like no one basically. Like
Yeah.
so even kind of like the cheap like the cheaper version of the plaster
Hmm.
is not done as much. And so we've done stuff like in some of the older places where I live, we've done some restoration stuff, and they don't even make us. We get historical money, I guess, or the GCs do to fix
Hmm.
restore old buildings, but we don't even have to do them like they did them anymore because people can't. It would be too expensive.
Hmm.
And and I was actually just thinking about this today, and so one of the excuses you get for people to say why don't they do them like this anymore because it would be too expensive. And
Yeah.
I thought, and I was thinking about that, like you know what really costs the most money when you make buildings,
Hmm.
not the man hours.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if you built the building in a year, well then it
It's
must not
cheap.
have cost that much. You know what I
It's
mean?
very
Like
cheap.
buildings that cost take many years to build cost
Yeah.
way more. But if they could build these buildings in a year,
Hmm.
well then maybe they weren't actually that expensive. You know?
Yeah. I know you have a good point. They were just quick and really good at it. Yeah. Then they have to get the materials there too. Right.
Well, that it was. I mean, obviously, doesn't that kind of if you really think about it, I know they had trains.
We
What are
know
those
that. Yeah.
lakes back in those days? But I mean, at the same time, they still had to load the trains up. They had to, get the stuff from the train stations to the job sites. They had to store the materials. I mean, like I guess it's somebody who's in the construction business. Like, there's a lot of logistics besides just having it. Like, you got to get it from the train depot.
Yeah.
Like, and then you got to move it around the city.
Yeah.
It's obviously very well. It looks very
And
busy.
and then you've got to get it up however many stories depending on where you're at in the build process. So you've got to
Absolutely.
have a system.
That's a great point too, because I think that like as somebody who does drywall, it's obviously way easier than whatever I'm sure they built the walls out of like what is it like let like
Lap and plastic.
iron and
Oh,
lath and
yeah,
like
yeah,
wood slats and all that kind of stuff. And so
yeah.
like we would have to get a boom truck or a crane in order to put the drywall into these windows.
Hmm.
Well, like yeah, how are they getting these things up these heights?
Manpower. That's
Lots of guys, lots of
just lot.
people.
Yeah, that's what why those are the kind of rebuttals I get on a lot of my videos. Like it's just they just had a lot of people that needed to work, and all those people had really good work ethics, and they were all really skilled as well. And then,
Hmm.
but the populations of these places are really low. Sometimes I'll target a place that has a very small population just to illustrate that point a bit better. But you can't just keep throwing. Or some people will say, well, they brought in a crew from Chicago to build that in that small town. It's like, well, have you seen Chicago at the time? Because that was happening there too. So
It's
the bottom.
oh, go ahead.
No, no, you go.
I was gonna say that it's funny because me and my buddy we did a movie called Ancient Angels, and it's kind of like obviously just based on the title, you can tell it's like it's very similar to Ancient Aliens,
Hmm.
where that's I think maybe that's where I first really got into the space where you're looking at the megaliths from obviously the ancient times, and as such somebody and so when you understand like the Great Pyramid and all the other things around those areas where they were saying, oh well, they just got slaves to do it, they just got a bunch of them, and you're like, well, they would have had to know what they're doing though, you know what I mean? It's kind of like they must have got the best skilled slaves ever, and
Well,
also at some point the manpower means nothing when they're trying to maneuver around really tight spaces and they've got perfectly cut granite and boxes that barely fit in there, and like you couldn't fit people, so but there is this almost like just completely just I don't know, just ignorant take that they just had a lot of people to do this. And again, like, so if I needed to get a job done right now, I couldn't just go get any 10 guys off the street to do it. They would have to know what they're doing.
yeah. So it's a mental laziness, I think, when people just say, "Oh, I don't really want to think about it, so just lots of people is good enough for me." I think
Well,
it's, you
mm.
know, go ahead.
No, I was going to say that. Well, I saw another video when they were talking about that, where it's like that most of us at some point in our lives have went on some sightseeing tour, and we looked at something like what you're showing right now, and we
Hmm.
said, "Wow, how did they do that?" But we really didn't actually think about it. Because it was
Hmm.
like, because at one point you just said, well, it's there, so obviously it got built somehow, and then you just kind of like forgot about it. But like but when you actually really try to like really think about it,
Hmm.
like actually think about it, now you actually think like, wait a minute, like I can't actually process that in my mind.
Yeah, and that's what we're trying to do with this research is trying to, because for the longest time they don't really want us to think about our true past. They want us, you know, I say they, but society in general, we're trained to um, entertain ourselves. You know, we have the Hollywood, we have the conventional narrative that we're taught in schools, and then you just sort of fall in line. And if you step outside of those norms, then you become the outcast, right?
Absolutely.
But they want us. That's what they want us. They don't want us to have inquiring minds or critical thinking skills. It doesn't serve um, the ones who are hiding whatever they're hiding from us. And we know that there are lies at the upper levels in our society. We've witnessed that in the recent years.
Yes. Well, that's the funny thing. I was just thinking about that. Yeah, just look at the inside of that. I mean, like the outside's impressive enough, but then you look at the inside of it, and it's like that is. I don't care how many guys you had to do that. Like
Yeah,
that's not a matter of manpower. That's a matter of like That's a technology.
yeah, and what?
That speaks of a technology because it's like that's not all hand done because
Well,
nobody's hand is that steady.
well, that's what gets me. That's part of the draw of anything handmade is the human error that comes with it.
Right.
Like,
Mm-hmm.
that's part of what you're paying for. When you get something handmade, you know, it's crafted. But you're right. At some level, starts to become something beyond that. There is no evidence of human error in the way that these things are assembled that I can see. This is the
No.
Bronx Library, by the way. I don't know if it's the one you'd mentioned earlier, but this
Yeah,
is in
that's
the
what.
Bronx.
So I was saying that, yeah, if you look at that thing and you compare that to the Pantheon in Rome,
Mhm.
I'm guessing that the Pantheon is way bigger. Just because obviously I know how impressive. Because I think that had like the biggest concrete dome, unsupported dome in like the world until like, yeah, to like modern times.
Mhm.
And so then you look at something like this and you look at Penn Station and you're like, that is obviously the same tech.
Mhm.
Whatever they use, I mean, because it's almost identical. Like I said, this might be a little bit smaller, but
Mhm.
it, yeah, like if you took somebody who's got a very skilled hand, I mean, it had to be poured at some point. Like, you know what I mean? That's what that makes sense to me if they made a mold, but still you'd have to make a perfect mold,
Yeah, you still have to make the mold. That's exactly right.
which is not
So
easy. Which again, it's
there's.
not easy. And it's like the funny thing about like a lot of the architectural designs in these things.
Mhm.
Yeah, like there you go. Like it
That's
doesn't look the
Pantheon.
same. It looks the same, doesn't it?
Yeah, yeah, you're right. You're right. Yeah, and you see this in a lot of the domes, like the state capitals in the states. My God, they're incredible buildings, and then it's not something you ever really hear about the state capitol buildings.
Well, that was actually funny. So that's another place along the rabbit hole that I went down, and I was like, so like obviously, if you guys don't know by my username, JT follows JC. So JC is Jesus Christ. So I'm a Christian guy, but I'm very conspiratorial. So like I'm one of those guys who think all the elites are worship the devil, basically. To not be subtle about it. So I've said that I made a video a long time ago about saying that when you go into like the ancient ruins, like the archaeologists always say they got two takes usually. This is a temple or it was a tomb.
Hmm.
And then I started going around like to the state capitol buildings in the United States, and I was like if somebody found this, if you found ruins of this place, what would you say this was? And I said it looks like either it's a temple or it's a tomb. I mean, because like that's basically your two options. Because you go around them, they're so ornate, and I think that's what I was like. I was blown away. I think there's like in Minnesota, and I think Iowa. I mean, almost every state in the United States has a Capitol building that makes no sense. I think, with like Nebraska, Lincoln, Nebraska has got some insane building. It like,
Have you seen Des Moines?
yeah, Des Moines. That's what I'm saying. Like
Five
they
domes.
they make it makes no sense. And again, like we are told in school, and it's funny as you mentioned school that yeah, the school is teaching you not to think. It's teaching you to regurgitate information by memorization.
Hmm.
They don't want you to think because like when you actually think about it, you're like, wait a minute, if we are told that back in those days, like our founding fathers wanted limited government, why the
Hmm.
heck would we ever allow them to build that with our tax dollars?
Hmm. Hmm.
Didn't they throw tea into the harbor because because they didn't like paying taxes? And it's like, hey, we want to make a gold dome over here. We want to build a like a palace
Yeah.
where the public servants work. Does that like you know what I mean? Like doesn't that sound a contradictory?
Yeah. No,
Because it does
five
to me.
domes. Not just one dome, five domes.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's funny that in today's day and age, it'd be like, okay, so we see all the problems with our countries. Well, you're in Canada, right?
Yeah.
But I think we both are kindred spirits in the fact that we could both look at our governments and say, you guys waste so much money. Like, what are you doing with the money that you've got?
I don't
And
know.
then,
I like the Canadian government quite a bit, actually.
oh, do you?
Sorry, I see the same face. Sorry, sorry.
Okay. Well,
No,
I'm saying,
we have problems up here too.
but you know, what I'm saying, like, can you imagine if they said, if like your Congress or our Congress said, "Hey, I want to build this," and we would be like, "What?"
Yeah.
But like,
It's,
don't
well,
you have more important things to do than this? And it doesn't seem like a luxury here. And that's what I was saying when I went to Washington D.C. I said the only thing that makes sense, and this makes sense in kind of like the ancient Egyptian thing, where you'd say this must have been a time of great prosperity.
mhm.
Like it must have been a time of peace and prosperity,
It has
because
to be.
other than that, it makes no sense. I mean, like it really does seem like a time where they had all the time in the world to make beautiful art, beautiful architecture, music, all the things. But
Yeah.
when you're worried about the bare necessities in life, you're at war. like, well, then maybe you'd say, I don't know, this one town just burned down. Maybe we should build, like, rebuild that place before we, we like make this Roman, this Roman temple here for our
Yeah,
statesmen. I mean, that makes no sense.
it can't come out of a time of conflict and strife. You know, they say the states is just coming out of the Civil War, so you've got a divided people, and all of a sudden they're shooting up these buildings, these incredible buildings, even though the dividing lines are clearly drawn as according to the history they tell us. It's to me, it's bullshit, as far as I'm
No,
concerned.
no, I mean, I'm with you because that's what I was saying. Like that, when you think about it, so like what we're told in the United States is that we fought a Revolutionary War in the late 1700s, and
Hmm.
then and then immediately, like right after that, so the United States moves their capital from Philadelphia to Washington D.C.,
Hmm.
and then right away, basically, they're fighting the British again, and the British basically burn everything down in Washington D.C.
Hmm.
So like all these buildings, like that's what I said. We went there. I went there with the wife a couple weeks ago, and we were reading some of the stories, and it was like all the classic buildings were like, well, they built it this age, and then it burned down, and then they built it again, and then it's like, and when they were building them all again, it was right in the middle of the Civil War. And if you
Yeah.
think about like geographically, so like the Washington D.C. probably was not a great geographic location at that time, right? Because it's right at the edge of the Mason-Dixon line.
Mm.
So right, so Virginia is the south, and obviously Maryland is the north. So Washington D.C. is right in the middle.
Mm.
So meanwhile, they're they're building the Capitol building. You know
So
what I mean? Like right at the same time. I mean, it makes no
is
sense.
DC like Switzerland? As far as there no conflict within DC, or I don't know the
Well, that
story.
I guess again, this is obviously what we're told.
Yeah.
It's told that the South wants to secede, but at some
Yeah.
point, the South actually does go into the North and start fighting. But I mean, as far as I can tell, they never went to D.C. to try to burn it down or anything like that because the
That's
British,
interesting.
the British just did that.
It's
But
interesting. It's
but they do go fight in, like they do fight like Gettysburg. It's like a Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. So they pushed into the North at some point. I
yeah.
mean, what we're told is obviously the North had way more resources than the South,
I
and
I
so it
you
was
know
a kind of a war of attrition. They could never win
yeah.
because they didn't have the money to fight against the North.
It,
And
to me, yeah, it seems like why the need to reenact? I find why the reenactment part of that story is very strange to me, like the Civil War reenactments that go
right,
on
right.
there.
Well, it's
It's like
funny yeah, somebody who's like I was like a red, white, and blue kind of guy. Like I grew up in a military town. I remember not like wanting to know much about the Civil War because I thought it just I'd rather hear about like the wars we won
mm,
than like this ugly time where we're fighting against each other. And but yeah, like why would you want to reenact that? Because like I mean, like literally, it was kind of like brother against brother. Like you're not like
yeah.
that's not a pleasant memory for the United States.
Yeah, it seems
Shouldn't
like
be.
a repetition of trauma, almost like makes me wonder if the other really strong presence I see in my research in the states is the Masonic presence from
Oh,
town to. It doesn't matter where you go; they're everywhere. You know.
that is exactly why I think I started to get interested in the architecture because I knew like the Art Deco, the Freemason architecture. That's kind of what I was like. I was looking for symbolism in architecture, and
Mm.
obviously the Freemasons are putting it in there. But now I'm starting to wonder if what the Freemasons built, other than a bunch of lies, was did they just put their symbols on existing buildings and claim them as their own?
Well, I have to wonder. I do wonder if the initiation into the secrets, part of the secrets, is the secret of the old world that is being kept from the unsuspecting public. And then if you're in the know, then you're in the know that what these actually come from. That's where I'm starting to lean with my research.
I think that it's funny because like I said, I started in the Wayback Machine. So I was talking about like the pyramids and stuff. And that's why I was always thinking like when you hear about the Illuminati stuff and you see the people flashing up like the Eye of Horus, and then they're
Mhm.
making like the triangle, like they're making the pyramid symbol. And I thought, oh, this is a secret knowledge of like, I was thinking like as a Christian, like the pre-flood era, the antediluvian age, where again, I think it's some of like the most megalithic structures were built before Noah's flood. So I was thinking like, so there was clearly a knowledge of something before then, because again, we don't know what it was. Like, how did they build the pyramids? People will debate that until we're all dead and gone.
Yeah.
Like, so how do they do it? We don't know, but I do believe that some people do know, and I think some people know why they were there. And I don't think they were tombs, because again, they didn't find any mummies in them. I think that they were, but it's interesting. Yeah. So now I started making connections with this stuff, and I feel like there's a lot of similarities where, again, like if you look at the mansard roofs and you look at all like the domes and like the weird antenna things, a lot of people have made the connection where, hey, maybe the pyramids were some kind of energy, machine, some kind of a energy conductor. Well, maybe that's what these things were, because it makes so much more sense that if you would spend this much time, unless it was a time of peace and prosperity and you could just make beautiful things, there was a practical application for that. Well, so we know it was not a time of peace based on what they tell us. So either that's a lie when they built it, or it's a lie that it didn't have a practical use. Because like I said, again, if these people are worried about bare necessities, why would they take the time to make a roof that looks like that?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things you talked about, how they put us in the schools to regurgitate what they want us to learn. I think one of the biggest parts of that is the chronology of the past. Because when I try to peer into the past, I have a chronology in my head that's been implanted into my consciousness through the schooling system and through, of course, everyone around me, but that all comes from the same place. So what I suspect with my research is that they've distorted the timeline dramatically, and they've stretched it. They've moved things further away from us than we think. Like you were talking about Noah's flood. I suspect this cataclysm and resulting flood probably happened a lot more recently than even the Bible may be depicting. So I'm sure they could tamper with anything, right?
It could be. I guess the thing is we don't really know. I think that I've taken a lot of things just based on, like, obviously in faith that the people were telling us the truth. I mean, I guess I never had any reason to doubt them. Yeah. But I do think that one thing that I remember really kind of made me really kind of question, like it made no sense to me, was that they told us that the Romans knew how to build things. They knew how to do things that we don't know how they did it. And I was like, wait a minute. We're told that the Romans wrote everything down. And we're also told that the Romans ruled the whole modern world. So like that people, I think a lot of people don't know that, like, the Romans like founded Paris and London and like this, all the cities in Europe, they basically created those cities. And the Romans were not in the business of just destroying things and just leaving ashes. They set up governors and prefects. And so if the Romans ruled the whole world, the Romans weren't just sitting in Rome ruling the world. They were ruling it from the places. So how did Rome fall and then things get lost? Because the Romans were everywhere. You know what I mean? So how did that knowledge ever get lost? And then I started to think that makes no sense, because I was even if you go back to the very first century, I looked up like that Rome. I think Nero had like working machines. He lived in a place that actually had a rotating tower that had ball bearings and everything. And I think they even had the means to like use water pressure to explode mountains. I mean, you could look this up. Yeah. I mean, this is not conspiratorial. This is like, they had all kinds of, the Roman concrete is superior to the concrete we have now.
Yeah.
Like, that makes no sense. I don't think it makes sense, because we're supposed to be more advanced than them.
Well, it tells us we're not on a linear timeline through human development.
Right? Oh, is that? Oh, like I see the building you got right there. That's the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C. I went to that. I was just there.
In this building recently?
Yeah, I was just there like about a month ago, maybe like 3 weeks ago.
This is in probably my top 10. This is a ridiculous structure.
Absolutely. I went. Yeah, that was funny because I'm about 3 hours away from, depending on traffic, I'm about 3 hours away from DC, and I've been around DC a lot. But I remember like looking at that one and I was like, the Library of Congress, I had to go there. And I went inside that building and I said, this ain't a library. I said, this is it's so ornate on the inside. And the funny thing is that when you go to where the library section is, it's not actually that big. It's like, I mean, where the books are, there's not a lot of room for the books. Yes. I would say if you turned a page loud, everybody in the whole library could hear it because it sounds like it's made for sound to carry. I mean, just look how it's built.
Yeah.
And like I said, that kind of makes sense when you think about like the whole idea of like energy and frequencies and vibrations. There's not one place in this whole building that doesn't have a cool architectural design, a mural or whatever. It's unbelievable.
1888 to 1894. I think I had the date there. I don't know. I just can't envision the people of that time frame that in my mind doing this at that time. You know, I just can't see it.
No, I'm saying like I don't see how anybody in any timeline did this. Because that's the thing. It's like, but more to the point again, like I said, that what we're told is that our founding fathers, again, well, it's funny, always people say founding doesn't mean they found these things, but like the people who basically from the history that we've been taught founded America, and they wrote all the documents and said they did not want a strong central government. So at what point did the people say, hey, we're not going to give you our money to build DC like it's ancient Rome? Because that makes no sense. And again, like these people are like, they're fighting the British, they're fighting the Indians. They're trying to expand. We're told they're trying to expand westward. And so like, this kind of reminds me of like when I read the Bible and you read about like that so King David was obviously one of the greatest kings in Israel. So what he did was, but obviously he conquered all around Israel, like conquered all the peoples. And of course, when you read in the Bible, he's bringing gold and silver and bronze and all the precious metals and wood and everything back to Israel. And then Solomon continues to get even stronger. And then they build the temple, right? But because they're so rich and they're so dominant in the time that they live. Now, fast forward to 1776 or whatever, in 1800, like the United States are not conquering anyone. Like they're not getting spoils from foreign wars.
No,
they're just trying to get established. So you know what I'm saying? Like that does not make sense from what we know. It makes sense that the ancient Romans did that because, again, they were dominating around the world. So they would have been taking plunder from these places, and they would be building their capital to be awesome. So now explain to me how that makes sense that the Washington, D.C. looks like this.
Yeah. And, it's not even just D.C. too. Like it's amazing what I find across the states. Along these lines, especially the state capitals, but courthouses too are pretty ridiculous. I dive into those quite a bit. And
well, I think that even the what's even more suspect is the West Coast, because again, like I said, it's funny if you look at the history we've been taught is that Lewis and Clark were just going to find what they're trying to find, like another way to get, I guess, another shipping lane or something, and so they were going across the Mississippi to basically just explore, and it's so comical when you think about it. You got like two guys in like a little posse going across the western part of the United States to discover things. And this is in the 1800s.
Are they horses? Lewis and Clark, that was their thing there.
Well, they certainly didn't have anything. Well, they didn't have anything supposedly back then. This was like 1803 to 1806, I believe. Lewis and Clark.
That's way back. Yeah, wow.
But I mean, but you're thinking about, but it's really not way back when you consider that by like the mid 1800s, like you have well-established cities on the West Coast.
Yeah, this is San Francisco. I jumped over to my San Fran file since we were talking about it.
Could
easily be Spain.
San Francisco that also burned down like multiple times, I think.
But yeah, I mean, John Levi in his book he talks about I think it's a mid 1850s, just after the gold rush, 49, right? 1849, the 49ers, I think is
Mhm.
when the gold is discovered in that area, and then I think it's 4 to 6 fires in the span of 2 or 3 years, ripping through the encampment there, and then of course you have the San Francisco earthquake and subsequent fires.
Well, you have. I think he's. I believe I remember was watching one of his videos recently. And it was like I think he was saying that in 1849 there was like 1,000 people in San Francisco,
Yeah,
and so by like I think the one of the famous like what is it the panoramic view of San Francisco was like 1873, I believe.
I know the one you mean. Yeah,
And for one thing, it's like you look at the picture, it looks old. I mean, the building, that's what I'm saying. All those old pictures, all the buildings and stuff have age to them,
yeah,
and
yeah.
it's like the city just goes on forever. And it's like, okay, so there was a gold rush. Did everyone find gold who went? Because how did they afford all the buildings they did? And it's like again, this is like before like the railroad, the transcontinental railroad was established, right? So they were in San Francisco, and then they just built this place. I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's funny because I said I was joking on one of my podcasts. I was saying that when I watch like Western movies, like Tombstone
hmm
and those kind of movies, like when I was a kid watching that stuff, I would have said, well, that had to be like 500 years ago. I'm being like, I'm kind of kidding, I'm exaggerating, but at the
yeah.
same time, like I never realized that like like famous cowboys like Wyatt Earp actually lived into Hollywood days where they were training like the early Hollywood actors how to act like cowboys in the Western movies.
Wild Bill Hickok.
Yeah, so that's what I'm
Big
saying.
hit.
It's like that's what I'm saying. It's so funny. So you're thinking like, so our idea of time when you don't think about it is
hmm
it seems like there's time for it, and then you actually start to think about like, okay, so I'm 45 years old now, and I'm like, wait a minute, if I really thought about like if I go back to when I was born and like 40 years before then, like you're getting pretty far back in the timeline. And how much have I seen the progression as far as like building cities and stuff like that? I've never in
Yeah.
my whole lifetime I've never seen them build like a city like anything
No,
like we've seen on it. Like
no,
that's
like
never
a city spring up from and a population quadruple. You know.
no, nothing. I mean, there's been no cities in my lifetime that I can remember in the United States that like went from insignificant to significance.
Yeah. That's
So then
interesting.
you so then you think about so then you think about like all the cities that happened in the 1800s that by what means and like and why. Again,
hmm
like you think like as an adult you would say you'd have to move somewhere to there'd be some industry that would propagate that. Like I mean
Yeah.
again, them finding gold makes sense in a city like Tombstone, Arizona that literally is like looks like a wooden city with dirt roads because people are not trying to stay there. They're literally just trying to get gold, right?
Yeah.
And then they're going to go back to where they were.
Kick old and get out. Yeah.
But they're not building homes there like they did in San Francisco. So like what's the difference? You know what I'm saying? Like that's a mining town, right?
Yeah.
And then you have San Francisco that was not a mining town. That makes no sense.
That's what I mean. I think San Francisco was like 80 miles away from the gold, where the gold was actually being
Right?
found. Something ridiculous, you know. And I've read some strange accounts, stories of the streets being filled up with goods that are coming in on the ships. It's just so bountiful that the potholes in the streets or the rut holes in the streets are just filled up with goods. You know, like valuables, strange stuff like that. You know, there's strange accounts from that era there.
What's a crazy video I saw about a year ago. It was this young woman who she was going through the streets of San Francisco, and at some point there was a very famous, I guess, graveyard in like somewhere around the middle of the city,
hmm
and I believe they said unless you like basically had some kind of family that tried to stop the government or they could move the plots if there was nobody who basically protested, they took all the old supposedly because this was a very valuable property.
Yeah.
They dug up all the old graves and they took the tombstones and they used the tombstones to be like pavers in the streets and like they literally made the gutters out of them. Have you heard
Oh
that?
wow. No, no, but that's interesting.
I mean, but
Uh,
it's like I mean, talk about disrespectful. I mean, like literally,
Totally, totally.
you could see like like a family member's tombstone is like turned into a gutter, and
Yeah.
but she was actually going through and she was looking and she could see some of the dates and part of a name, and I started to think, and I didn't think. I mean, other than that, I just thought that's disrespectful.
Mm-hmm.
But now I'm thinking about it. I wonder if some of the dates on the tombstones didn't really make sense. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
is it possible that that made no like the timeline
Timeline. Yeah, they have to hide these things.
it
Yeah.
didn't work.
Yeah. It's very possible. There's a lot of strange things that don't make a lot of sense that probably for the longest time we probably just didn't think about if we heard it. Just that sounds strange and you move on. But when you really ponder on it, this starts to sound very silly. This is San Francisco again. Like it's still looking like what we saw in DC as well, right? This is their city hall, I believe.
Yeah, it makes it. I think some of the craziest ones where I think he like was John Levy talks about like Salt Lake City
Mm-hmm.
and like Portland and Seattle. They make no sense. They make
Yeah.
the timeline of those places makes zero sense.
Yeah, I was just looking at the what is it, the Spokane City Hall. Have you seen that one? I want to show you.
No, I have not.
Spokane in Washington State? Yeah, it's not far from where I am, so I know it fairly well. It's a 1-year wonder. Let's see if this will come up for me. You tell me if 1 year makes sense.
Oh gosh.
Yeah, right. Spokane, Washington.
Yep, these were just settlers and cowboys. They just said, "Hey, we need a town hall too."
They had a fire in the 1880s. In that area, like Vancouver had a fire in the 1880s, Seattle had a fire in the 1880s, Spokane, Calgary as well. So the timeline shifts as we move to the west, but the story doesn't really change.
No, it's all the same. Is another funny one is that I'm a big movie guy, and if you guys remember Heath Ledger, he was in that movie called 10 Things I Hate About You, and I want to say I'm not sure if that was I don't think that was Spokane, Washington, but it was what was the other big city in Washington? Tacoma. Yeah. So in that movie, it takes place in Tacoma, Washington. And the high school in the movie, 10 Things I Hate About You, it's like the high school is in this castle. And I was like, I did a little video about that. And I said, it makes no sense that nobody went to a school like that, because it makes it like literally it's like a castle on like the bay or the water or something like that. It's like it's gorgeous.
I know it.
Yeah, I think it's called what is it? Stadium High School.
Yeah, and its stadium's way down below it.
Yeah. So this is
a postcard of it.
Okay, so I did a video about this, and so here's what we're told about this place. Okay, so back when they started building this thing, like Tacoma, Washington had about 20 or 30,000 people, and they were going to build this luxury hotel. Well, during the building of this thing, there was the economy went to garbage, I guess, and then so they couldn't finish building it, and then also a fire broke out on the inside, and all the building materials got burned up in the inside of it.
Oh, bad luck.
But luckily, the school district decided to buy it and turn it into a hotel room. Turn it into a high school like within like 5 years. And I was like, wait a minute, okay. Me thinking about this. All right, first of all, if somebody was building this who had all this money, why would they couldn't ride out the bad economy? They didn't expect like some bumps in the road, like they would if you're going to build a hotel. Like obviously this is a long-term investment, right? This is not a rich quick, get rich quick scheme, right?
Yeah.
So why wouldn't you just finish it? Because obviously you're pretty invested at that point once you built the whole outside. And then if the economy was so bad that they could not finish it, how did the school district have the funds to build this and then convert it into a high school? And I was like, wait a minute, that obviously makes no sense, because again, this is the time when we're told that they didn't have money printing machines, right? They couldn't just print out the $100 bills. They would actually had to get money to do this. And most people would have said, well, we're kind of just gold miners, and I don't even care if my kids can read. So like,
Yeah,
no, you're not taking my money to build a castle for the kids.
yeah, yeah. It's interesting. It's an interesting perspective you're bringing across with the ethic. Like centralized government is not um, what the idea was, right? The grand idea. But we're seeing if we're going by what we're seeing, it would have had to have been all this money being dumped in by governments to construct these massive structures, which contradicts that philosophy, I guess,
Well,
is what
we're told this is before income taxes.
you're saying.
So this is before income taxes, and then of course you even see like movies about like them, like settlers expanding westward. They were giving out free land,
Hmm.
in a lot of these places. So what are
Yeah,
they taxing them right away?
yeah,
Like so did they have property taxes back then? I mean, like I don't know how they funded any of this. I mean, it makes no sense. I mean, obviously I know now. It's like no, they did. These buildings were already here. I mean, because otherwise it makes no sense. The people who, I mean, when you see the Oregon Trail and the people who went
hmm,
on it, were those the people who were building the buildings?
yeah,
It's
right.
nonsensical.
Well, yeah. My wife and I recently watched one of the Yellowstone offshoots, 1883, I think it was, where they're
Hmm.
going from Fort Worth up to eventually they end up in Montana. They're trying to get to Oregon. Oregon's the dream on the coast, right? But
Hmm.
they portray again the Hollywood um, conventional narrative that there's just nothing but Indians in the prairies, and this is in 1883, and a lot of these buildings that I find, some of these are built right in and around that time, right? So what we're being shown through Hollywood and what we're seeing in this research is a direct contradiction, I think, too.
Yeah, and I think that's what I was saying, that when I was watching like those Western movies, you really, I mean, when you think about the Wild West in America,
Hmm.
like it seems like it was such a long period of time, but when you really think about it, it's like they're really just showing you like a generation of people.
Yeah,
That's why it's like all the cowboys basically had gunfights with each other because it's like they're all contemporaries.
yeah,
And so like
yeah.
there's this, it's a very short time where the West was wild.
Hmm.
Because
Hmm.
if you really think about it, like there wasn't a lot of time for it to be wild. So we're told like, yeah, you have like these Indian tribes that are very violent, and then there's all these battles with the Indian tribes, and then you have people basically making a living, playing poker, cussing, and shooting each other all the time.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, you have a very civilized place, like in big cities, like very close vicinity of these
Hmm.
places.
Yeah, yeah.
And
Good
so like
point.
so it makes no sense that yeah, why is there these lawless places? I mean, it kind of makes sense. Obviously, you have some town where you don't have law everywhere, but I mean, at the same time, the way I was thought about it, I thought everyone's out east, right? Like all the real people are, all the real like kind of settlers in the real established areas. But then you realize that there's plenty of stuff on the West Coast based on what we're told.
It's funny you say that about the law, right? Because again, one of the things I look at a lot are the courthouses. I've got pretty much all of them archived on my computer here. Um, and it doesn't matter what state you go, Washington, Colorado, and of course, Midwest, ridiculous. They were building these courthouses 1870s to 1910 is like the sweet spot. So that would be the lawless era. That would be,
Right.
the Cowboys and Indians era. But you're seeing these 3-4 story courthouses with these domes and like who's building that while there's gunfights going on in the street?
Right, right. We're shown in these little towns that are holding people up with like one deputy and like a sheriff, and then they got these guys behind these bars in this wood building.
Yeah,
Meanwhile, it's like, don't they have to justify the fact that they built this gigantic courthouse like very closely
they
by?
need more criminals, right? They need more criminals.
I mean,
I did.
I think what seems very obvious, like once you start to think about it, it's like all these places are repurposed
Mhm.
because it's like, yeah, you think about it. I mean, it kind of makes sense that when you see these very impressive buildings with these massive towers, and they all become like basically town halls or post office, it's because the government took them over.
Mhm. The
Because yeah,
powers
because
that
it
be, right?
yeah, because it doesn't make sense. Again, like that. Again, we are told that they didn't have income taxes back then. So how did the governments have that much money to build stuff?
Hmm. Hmm. Well,
This is the time where like that. I'm of the belief that America is definitely an empire, and they would never use that word. We would never use that word of ourselves
mm,
because it's a again in the age of colonization and that stuff. They don't want us to be
mhm,
called empire.
it's a
But,
dirty word.
but at the same time, like this is a time when the United States is kind of really expanding. It's not it wouldn't have a lot of money. You know, again,
Yeah,
like
it shouldn't.
The South was basically poor. I mean, like what we're told is that the Southern states didn't even have enough money for their soldiers to have uniforms after a while,
It's
right?
interesting.
But at the same time, they're obviously building crazy stuff in the South as well, and
Yeah,
so that the governments of these places would not actually be yeah they would not have just unlimited funds to build luxury buildings.
yeah, it doesn't make sense. Practicality would be number one. Build what you need to function. Not an extra couple stories with spires, mansard roofs, and cones on top of the turrets and all the rest of it. This is the Tacoma one again here.
Right, and this is not even I guess and this is not even counting when you like actually get into like the star forts and just weird like
Yeah.
basically geographic things they shape the coastlines and
Mm,
ports and all these things. It's like I think that's one of the things that really kind of like the buildings are one thing,
mhm,
but then when you actually see like the cities look very well planned out,
mhm.
like the way the streets are laid out and then
Yeah.
like the canal systems and all the things, it's like
Canals. Yeah.
they're well thought out. So it's kind of like that if you just had a bunch of cowboys moving westward, you know what I mean? Are they just allowed to build whatever they want? Who's in charge of like making sure that the streets are laid out the way that they are?
Yeah. And who's getting the bricks there to build these things? And who's
It,
who's
no.
quarrying the stones?
Well,
Right.
right. Well, yeah, it's one thing to say, "Hey, I've got a little bit of money and I'm moving out to San Francisco." And then even these days, like I know that's where we're located at, there's certain places in North Carolina where they would try to get us to go down and work there because they don't have enough contractors to work there. You
Mhm.
know what I mean? So what was it like in 1850? And you'd be
Mhm.
like, "Well, I really want a castle here," and then you'd be like, "Well, buddy, there's not there's
I,
no
I
there's
don't
no
have anybody who knows
stoneworkers.
how to build it.
Well, we got this one crew, but basically they're in Chicago right now. But of course,
Yeah.
what we're told is that the crews from Chicago are building them not just in Chicago, but in New York City, in Philadelphia,
Mhm.
Baltimore, you know,
Everywhere. Yeah.
Nebraska, San Fran. I mean, yeah, like so there was an endless supply of people who could do it, or there wasn't, and the contractors were basically just kind of maybe doing a little light reno to some of these buildings
Yeah.
that were already there.
Making modifications, making it areas usable, certain areas usable. Yeah, that's what I suspect has been going on. And also, a lot of the narrative behind these structures were given an architect, just like a sort of a bare bones architect name. Often you can't even search the architect, um,
Mm-hmm.
and often the architect was chosen in a contest. They'll say the locality put out a contest for architects to design their next courthouse, and this is the guy who won. He was 27 years old. He'd never done it before, but he churned out this crazy looking castle. You know,
Well, it makes sense that like you'd have architects who don't know what things cost if they were just real young and they said, "Well, I think castles are pretty cool, so I'd like to see more things look like castles." And like
I
these
like
days,
fairy tales.
I
Yeah,
like all that stuff. So like I think I like the medieval style. So let's just
yeah,
build prisons and schools that look like castles. And somebody would say, I like the idea, but it's not really very practical because those are very expensive. And we don't really have people that are like the European style. Those people have been long dead. But for
yeah.
some reason, I guess nobody told them no, and they just did it.
Well, they did it, and they put dragons on the corners and angels, and it's ridiculous, right? We should. I want to talk a little bit about the orphan trains. We talked about that before we went live. Um, yeah, it's an interesting aspect of the history here. You know.
Well, I think so. That is kind of like where I have started to like really maybe understand or like at least give you a possible explanation what we're looking at. So as a Christian, I have kind of grown up like waiting for the return of Jesus. So we're waiting for, again, as everyone who's probably like who's been to church at all, they know that like, hey, this could be the end times. The way everything seems like it's deteriorating and society is like basically breaking out into chaos on a daily basis.
Mm-hmm.
But we started to like kind of basically revisit the scriptures, and we're like, you know what? Jesus actually seems pretty clear that he came back. He was coming back right away. Like if you go there, and obviously that's a longer discussion to talk about that. Like, so some of us have come to the conclusion that Jesus says he was coming back in the generation he was coming back in the first century.
Mm-hmm.
And then, so maybe if we're not waiting on the return of Jesus, is it possible that he came back when he said he was going to, and there was some kind of a age of peace and prosperity, because the Bible talks about a millennial reign.
Mm-hmm.
Is it possible that some of this stuff is evidence of that?
Mm-hmm.
Like, again, it makes no sense unless, like again, this is the question. I guess this is always like the question that comes up a lot of times in the conspiracy spaces. All right, well, why would they lie about that? Like most normies would say, well, why would they lie about Washington, D.C.? Why would they lie about the buildings?
Mm-hmm.
Well, this gives a reason why they might lie. And
Mm-hmm.
this is a possible thing where we were talking about, like, there's a kind of a not often quoted part in the Bible that talks about in Revelation chapter 20, there's the millennial age. And so Satan is bound during the 1,000-year reign of Christ.
Mm-hmm.
And then after that reign, Satan is let out.
Mm-hmm.
And so despite the fact that there's this great age of peace and prosperity, Satan is let out and he deceives the nations again. And basically at some point they go to make war with Jesus and the saints again. And
That's
so,
interesting.
yeah, so all that being said, is it possible that, like, as a Christian, I've always wondered, well, how could he deceive everyone?
So are you saying we're deceived?
Well, yeah. Like,
it's pretty obvious, actually, to me.
Well, if you think about it, it's like when you look under every stone and you realize you've been lied to about, like, we've been lied to about basically everything. I think at this point, I think that I'm not sure what we've been told the truth about.
Yeah.
So if there's a time where the devil deceives everyone, and if there was this age that was good before, is it possible that the devil would try to lie about our history?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think that makes sense. And so I don't know. I mean, of course, like I said, obviously this is a bigger topic. And if you guys are interested in hearing more about this, I've got some podcasts about it, like breaking it down specifically. But sort of made sense was if the 1,000-year reign ended, let's just say it ended right around the late 1700s, maybe early 1800s.
Yep.
It kind of makes a little sense because other than we don't really know what happened maybe around that time frame, we know that the earliest pictures we have, we see these amazing cities like in the 1850s with no one around, very eerie pictures of like just amazing buildings, barely any people around. There's mud everywhere. There looked like there was a natural disaster. And then the only time you ever do see people, they look like aristocrats. Mm-hmm. You don't see normal people in these places. And then, then you get into like, where is everyone at? Mm-hmm. And then very shortly after it, like you see like almost like a continuation of the story, you have orphan trains. Mm-hmm. And so orphans are, I mean, in America, and this blows me away. I think it was, I'm not sure what the year start was, but I think it was somewhere around 1850, 1860 to like the, I think late 18 or 1920s.
Yeah.
There was 250,000 orphans going around in trains just in the United States. Mm-hmm. And of course, if you think about it, like in today's term, that is a massive number. But in those days, we're told that the world population in 1800 was 1 billion people. Mm-hmm. So again, you'd have to like multiply that number by 8 times. And then what would that number be? Maybe even more, because the United States had much lower population then. I think it was like 20 or 30 million people. So it might be more like 10 times.
Yeah. Like, keep in mind, this is the historical accounts version, the number. It could be even more. Right. So is it possible that, I mean, what makes sense to me was there was something, I mean, whatever take you want to have it, something really bad happened. Mm-hmm. And it seemed like there was something that wiped a lot of people out. And then what you see, like I said, what you see in these pictures is
people dressed to the nines when you see them.
Yeah.
Or you see really poor orphans going around in trains, and it seemed like they tried to repopulate the place. And
Yeah.
and at the very same time, you also have insane asylums filled to the brim. I think it was like, so it's interesting if you think about the numbers game. So you have 250,000 orphans going around, in this certain time period. At the same time, you have 150,000 people locked up in insane asylums in America.
Yeah.
Which, like, the numbers kind of make sense, where it's like, where did these kids come from?
And that's not to mention the prisons as well, the jails
Right.
themselves.
Right.
Often gets overlooked in this, and when we're talking about the asylums, it's all incarceration of a different type, I guess. But yeah.
Well, but you look at the buildings that are supposedly the orphanages, the insane asylums, and the prisons.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, somebody who just thinks about, like, I mean, if you just think rationally, if somebody started to build a castle, and they'd be like, hey, what are you building over there? Oh, it's an insane asylum. Oh, it's a prison. It's an orphan. Like, people would be like, why is the state spending that much money on that thing?
Yeah.
Or like, why would anybody spend that much money on that? Because, again, they wouldn't. So what's more likely is that these places were repurposed.
Yeah. Well, again, you have impossible build times, and ridiculous reasoning for building the way they did. So the story is not believable to begin with anyway, right?
No, so I mean, I think that is where you get into, like, that makes a little sense. I mean, again, whether you believe, like, I know it's a far bridge, even for Christians, because we get rejected saying this all the time, but it makes sense in a way that there was something that happened, and whatever happened, it is the biggest lie. Mm-hmm. I mean, again, I don't care what side of, like, what you believe in, your belief in a God. Yep. If you're listening to this, I think you're probably likely on the same page that whatever happened that they don't want you to know about is the biggest thing that they could possibly lie about.
Yeah.
So again, you have to think about it in that kind of way, where why would they lie about this kind of thing? What, like, just think about it. So if you're into this space and you're into the old world stuff, what we believe now is they burn cities down on purpose. Mm-hmm. They, like, as we saw Penn Station, they demolished a building greater than you've ever seen in your whole life, mm-hmm. in order to cover something up. Mm-hmm. So to me, you really, I mean, there's nothing you couldn't imagine that's too big to think they could have lied about at this point, because I think that, again, they literally burned down almost every city in America in the 1800s, or somebody did accidentally.
And clearly they're trying to take us further away from God, trying to separate us from the spiritual. That's been a process that's been ongoing throughout the last 100 years, really, or I guess the last 60, 70 years. So clearly they're trying to move us to a point where we're disconnected from that what we may have been here, what we call the old world, to the point where we don't even believe our true past, which is kind of where we're at, I guess, for the normies. We don't even believe that this could be our past,
Well, what's that the famous phrase is, those who are ignorant of history are doomed to repeat it.
100%. Yeah.
And it does feel, like I said, it does feel like that makes so much sense in this space, where, like, that we are, like, got the pedal to the metal, about to go over a cliff, and people they really don't want to believe that the controllers, or whoever you want to say, would do what they would do. But if you believe what we're talking about, like, there was a reason why there's empty cities. I mean, what makes sense to me was those cities were once full, because, again, like, why would there be these massive why would there be a massive, like, metropolitan area in, like, San Francisco if there was nobody in the pictures? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I mean, I imagine at some point there were people there, and there wasn't after a while. Whereas, like, Dresden, I think, was it in, like, St. Petersburg? There's lots of pictures, like, in Europe that are just so eerie, that are, like, they look like huge cities, and there's no one there.
Yeah.
So obviously it's like, like, unless you just think that they picked a day when no one went outside their house to take the picture,
Yeah.
I heard somebody actually had a good take about that, and it's like, it's always good to put your basically your mind in somebody else's, like, put yourself in somebody else's skin for 1 second. If a person took a picture of that city with no one there, I believe it's possible that the cameraman had intention there.
Mm-hmm.
That's what the goal was to take a picture of a completely empty city that's like completely spooky. Well, I think that's what it was.
That's humanity coming out, even in the servants of the controllers, possibly. Maybe that's what art really is expressing what we are, despite the stranglehold. If you know what I mean.
Yeah.
It's kind of, you're sneaking it in there, but the controllers miss it for some reason, and it seems to slip through the cracks.
Well, I think that it's like at some point. I remember, if you guys follow Paul from Understanding Conspiracy, he mentioned that like there's only so much. I mean, again, this stuff is worldwide, right? So like there's only a certain amount that they could probably get rid of, because again, like the United States might be a unique example of this kind of stuff, because for one, it doesn't make sense to the timeline. Like Europe makes sense because it's got a very long history. Right, but America supposedly does not. So, and America does have a lot of money. So maybe America is a place that could afford to trash perfectly good buildings in order to build stuff again. And a lot of places they would say, no, you can't destroy that, because
South America's got a lot of evidence as well.
Well, right. Isn't that, well, I said it's kind of funny. And again, like if the timeline of South America and North America are similar, why is there so many more grand buildings, old world buildings, like in South America than there are in, like, let's just say Texas? It doesn't make sense unless those places could not afford to get rid of them.
They didn't have the means. They didn't have the means, right? Australia too is pretty spectacular. South Africa, ridiculous. Yeah, it's pretty amazing realm wide. You can see this, but like the rise of the empire, the American empire, right, and the laying the groundwork. The robber barons I talk about a lot too.
Yeah.
I think that whole story and the industrial age, and the money and the Federal Reserve and all of that kind of stuff all gets sort of is all part of the story here. I don't know how everything fits together, but.
Oh, I think that again, that's the funny thing is like I love that one meme. I don't know if you've seen it. It's like, there's a guy and it was like guy sleeping in history class, and it said me in history class, and then me in history in school, and then versus me in history as an adult, like researching my own. It's like versus Charlie Day from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, like connecting all the dots. That I started to become more interested in history as I got older, and I watched this show, and now I realize how kind of cheesy it was, but The Men Who Built America. And it's all about the robber barons. And so when I started to learn a little bit more about this stuff, I actually went to Asheville, North Carolina with my wife, and we went to the Biltmore Estate. And again, that's the biggest mansion in the United States. And it was built by, like, I think Cornelius Vanderbilt's like grandson. Yeah. But I was watching that show and I was paying more attention to it. And I'm like, wait a minute. So he was born in the 1700s. And I'm like, he's kind of responsible for like a lot of the railroad stuff. And I was like, wow, that wasn't that long ago. Yeah. But it was also long enough ago where it's like he was born when George Washington was president.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah.
Yeah. So you're kind of like, wait a minute. And as I'm watching that show, and I thought one thing that really never made any sense to me, I'm like, these guys are so rich and they seem so greedy and they seem so awful. But at the same time, look at this place. We would visit this thing. Yeah. How nuts is that place?
Yeah. Cornelius always has...
It's out in the boonies in North Carolina. And of course the Vanderbilts are from New York, or at least they're from like the Netherlands, originally, but like
sounds like it.
But why would they build that house in North Carolina? That's what I was really kind of wondering. But the interesting part about it was that they kept on saying that the railroads had been overbuilt. And I never quite understood what that meant. I was like, wait a minute. Like, why would they ever build too many of them? Because wouldn't you just kind of build them from, like, I don't know, a factory to a big city, or like city to city? Mm-hmm. And that was like an emphasis in the show that like he had to keep shipping stuff because the railroads had been overbuilt. And I thought, wait a minute, that makes no sense. And then I saw later picture, I saw like a lot of these old pictures of them, people digging up railroad tracks.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, wait a minute, maybe the railroads are way older than that, because that actually makes more sense, because why would they have railroads that they didn't need ever?
Digging out and repairing, I think a lot of that. Yeah.
And then, yeah, then if, like I said, then you have like obviously the most famous robber baron is John D. Rockefeller.
Mm-hmm.
And so Rockefeller in order to create his monopoly, he would buy oil refineries, and even like, I think even like Carnegie as well, they would buy factories and just shut them down. So I was like, why? So why would Vanderbilt even need to worry about too many railroads? Why wouldn't he just ship to where he could make money?
Yeah.
but again, it's like, but I think that it's like, it's a story. It's like, I think these are like, you tell one lie and then you got to tell a bunch of lies, because otherwise it doesn't make sense. And it really makes no sense that like 4 or 5 guys could build a whole country in like basically in their lifetime.
Yeah, and then they completely overhaul everything. They overhauled the education system, the medical system. They overhaul everything, and that's even conventional history. It's pretty obvious they're setting up a civilization.
It's, well, they're setting up what they really have done, and they've set up a story again. Like, so if Rockefeller, if you think about it, like, he's the guy who's responsible for the oil industry, basically the modern fossil fuel industry that we know it.
Yeah.
If it's possible that some of these old world buildings were basically had an access to clean energy, through like the ether or magnetism, however it could have possibly happened, that seems like a clean, renewable energy. Well, John D. Rockefeller's business was doing the opposite. so that's another good reason why they would lie. And again, like that.
Of course.
I think one of the old famous conspiracy theories was a guy who built an engine that ran off water.
Yep.
And I was like, well, if your business was selling petroleum products, would you ever let somebody make an engine that ran off water?
Not if I didn't, unless I wanted to go out of business.
Unless you wanted to go out of business. And the guy who has all the money would he let that happen? And then you just think, like, that's the world we live in, where why would they ever let us have free energy when they can charge for it?
Yeah, it's pretty obvious too. Really, it's become more and more obvious over time.
Yeah, I mean, but I think it's amazing, especially obviously all the pictures you're showing. This is endless.
It is, yeah, and it's amazing it wasn't visible before now, which makes me wonder what do you think of the time that we're living through right now? What's your take on that?
I mean, I feel like that a lot of people have noticed a shift. I mean, it was funny because I was even saying like that we see these eerie pictures of like empty cities, which is interesting. Like during the pandemic, there was pictures of empty cities, right? Like you could imagine those pictures coming up. You could imagine those pictures coming out one day and people being like very confused by them. And then we see the pictures of like the orphan trains, right? Yeah. Well, what if they showed pictures of the caravans going to the United States border, and people would be very confused by that because they'd be like, "What was going on then?" That like our minds, of course, like as people who like you and I, we would say, "Do we really believe those poor people decided to walk from Honduras to the United States, or is it more likely that somebody's funding them to get there?" Yeah. But for what reason? And I was thinking about this. Is like, it's a very terrifying thought to think that maybe those are the modern day orphan trains, and they're the replacements for the people who are living in the place right now. And that's not, and of course, like I said, this is not me being like a xenophobe or anything like that, but it's like literally like that. If you imported a poor class that does not know our history, you could tell them whatever.
That's right? What I was going to say. What if they just started going around to all these buildings and slapping a new plaque on them with a different date, like 1940 instead of 1902? And then you and I are looking at it and saying, hey, that's not true. That plaque used to say 1902. But we get hauled off to the asylum, and then the new population comes in, and they're like, hey, that was built in 1942. And then we just move forward. You could see how it may have been done. by looking at what's happening now, we maybe have gained some insight into what may have happened in the past as well.
Oh, yeah, exactly. I mean, well, if you think about it, like so to go back to the idea that maybe this is a time where post post millennial age of like reign of Christ age,
Hmm.
they literally said that one of the top reasons that they were locking people in insane asylums was basically like religious zealotry.
Hmm. Hmm.
So what does that mean?
Hmm.
I mean, and then they're calling them lunatics, and I think they were saying like my buddy found Alpha Talks found some of these articles that actually said that people were calling themselves saints and stuff in these articles, and it's like, I mean, I don't know what it means other than like that. Put it this way, yeah, if you knew that people you knew that were basically like us in those days, and they
Hmm.
said no, it did not happen the way it did, and then
Hmm.
they put that person in an insane asylum.
Hmm.
I mean, obviously, there's not a lot of benefit to deny what the controllers are trying to tell people what's
No,
happening.
no, you're not going to parrot what the person who got put in the asylum has been saying, because you'll get put in the asylum. So you're going
I'm,
to quickly change your tune, maybe, right?
yeah, I mean, what benefit is there to speak the truth in that kind of time? And it's like,
Exactly.
I think that maybe I feel like the times we're living in now, that part of, I mean, there's probably a net negative on society because of the internet and social media and that stuff. But I feel like that, a lot of us are using this the best way we can in order to, we're in the information age and we're kind of like trading back ideas. And there's a lot of us kind of putting these things together. But I mean, you could imagine like in a time where you're very isolated,
Hmm.
like, yeah, what benefit would you be like, they didn't build that last year? What are you
Hmm.
talking about? Like, yeah, they're like, yeah, you're gonna get hauled off to the nut house because you denied when the building was, like because you wanted to argue about when a building was built.
Yeah, you had a different version of the past of that area, and it doesn't take that long. You can see down through our timeline, World War One, World War Two, and all the other wars we were talking about earlier as well, how easy it is to erase the past, and after World War Two, the implementation of all the technologies, the mind control technologies like the television and Hollywood, we really ramping up. It's quite easy to see how visible um, that control mechanism is, and tightening that noose of our perception over time.
That picture right there is insane. Beijing.
Hmm.
I mean, like you really could. I mean, you honestly could have put any kind of city on there.
Hmm.
That's the last one I would have thought that picture was from, though.
Yeah, it's a narrative buster. Yeah, this one, it's so ridiculous, and it is fun and a fun topic to research too. One other thing I wanted to ask you too about is, are you familiar with Anatoly Fomenko, the Russian mathematician who did
I
research?
I've heard that. So was his did he was he one somebody who was looking into like the basically the cosmology to be able to figure out the timeline? I know he
Yes.
was.
Yes, he's suggesting that basically the Jesuits have distorted our timeline, um, and stretched it out and inserted. Well, some people say inserted 1,000 years, but certainly inserted events and duplicated events. Um, things like Louis the 14th, 13th, 12th, 11th, and all the rest of it. The Dark Ages, how we have very little information on the Dark Ages. So he's suggesting that the historical timeline has been stretched out. So I
You
just
know
want.
what? I mean, it makes sense to me. Actually, I said the thing that I found very interesting is I'm sure a lot of people have seen that video by was it Urwana? I'm not sure how you say his name.
Yeah, Iwar.
Yeah, and he did the lost history of flat Earth, and one of the things that really kind of blew my mind was the maps. And so when he was talking about so we have the Tropic of Cancer and Tropic of Capricorn, and
Hmm.
so the way those were designated were in the time of the age of Aries, and so the age of Aries was before Jesus came. So obviously, whether you're Christian or not, that we're told that they changed the calendar based on when Christ came.
Hmm.
So Anno Domino is the age, or yeah, I think that's how I'd say it.
Yeah,
The age of our Lord, and
yeah.
so, but the maps came from the before in the BC time before Christ.
Hmm.
Well, for some reason they did not update the maps, to designate the times of like where I think they said the tropics would have changed based on the astronomical age we're in, because that would have moved we'd have moved from Aries to Pisces.
Yeah.
And so in Pisces, it would have been the Tropic of Sagittarius, I believe, and the Tropic of Gemini.
Mm.
So it's very suspect that, again, as if we're told that the explorers would have needed to navigate based on the stars at times, so they wouldn't get lost, well, then clearly they would have updated the maps.
Yeah.
So if they didn't, well, again, the maps are either unreliable, or maybe those maps are more reliable than you realize, and the ages are all twisted up. Because I was saying that it's interesting when you actually kind of understand what your Bible says. So, and this makes sense, again, on a flat plane Earth, is that Genesis 1:14 says that God put the sun, the moon, and the stars in the firmament for signs, number one, for seasons, number two, for days, number three, and for years, number four. And so, again, so it's interesting if you think about it, like, so you would know what time of day it is based on where the sun is at in the sky. You think about, like, if you have a sundial, you would know what time of day it is. And then so the moon is in the sky, and it tells you the months, the moons. It tells you when the months are. Obviously, the sun also can tell you based on the solstices what time of year it is. But the constellations, the zodiac or the Mazzaroth, the way it turns, it actually tells you the season you're in. And then to go to a more macro view, that there's the precession of the seasons as well that tells you the astronomical age you're in. And so, yeah, so if that guy, which sounds like he probably knows his stuff, if he can calculate the astronomical age, then yeah, he can probably poke holes in that. Again, like, but people don't know that, what I just said. Like, they don't understand. Like, they think that the zodiac is just for horoscopes and for, like, am I going to find love or riches and stuff like that? But, like, literally, that's what God is saying in Genesis, that the sky is a clock. And that's why they actually, and again, like, you go to some more old world stuff, there's those astronomical clocks that are like that. Yeah. It's mind blowing. It's mind blowing to see that they actually have all that stuff on there, because, like, that's what it's for. I mean, so yeah, so I do believe that. I mean, the timeline makes no sense. I mean, I guess, the more you look into it, the more you get a little confused by it. I mean, I guess I could believe that guy, but I don't know enough about it to say how correct he is.
Yeah, no, I think it's an interesting idea, and it would definitely serve the controllers to distort the timeline. Like you said, people ask why would they do that? Well, why wouldn't they do that if they're trying to maintain control over us who are unaware of what actually happened in the past, and unaware of who and what we actually are. We're out of touch with who and what we are, I think.
Well, I think if you're ignorant of history, you're doomed to repeat it. And obviously, maybe that's their goal. I mean, it does kind of seem interesting if you think about the timeline that we know of, that it does seem like that the world population was very small in the 19th century, and then you have these orphan trains shipped around the world, and it starts to get repopulated. Fast forward into the baby boomer age in like the mid 20th century, they're already talking about how the population of the world's too high. Yeah. Right. And obviously that's only continued into where we live now. And it really does seem like, I mean, this is obviously my hypothesis, is that there was a time where there was this aristocrat class. They were not going to work in the factories. So they needed a lower class, a slave class, to go work the jobs they would not do. They got that. And then as you have the progression of how people procreate, it expanded rapidly. And now they don't want that, and so, like, it's like literally, like, the idea is like it does feel like that, whether it's like just the controllers, and I don't want to give them too much power in this, because I do believe there's a spiritual component to this, that it could only work if there was that. Yeah, there's a possible resetting of the deck, and then the general public, who doesn't want to talk about scary things, they would rather believe the dumbest lies. they don't understand that. Yeah, like literally, these people really are walking people up to the gallows, because I think that they've done it before. I mean, that's what I'm saying. I think that's what I'm saying. Like, if they've done it before, then they will do it again.
Yeah, and then if we just come to the understanding that they have done it before, maybe we can all become conscious of that fact and deal with the situation. Maybe that's what I'm hoping for, partially with what I do in my channel. So
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it could also be the other lie is the fact that, isn't it interesting what they did decide to build after they started to destroy some of these glorious buildings? Is I saw a video some years ago, and it was from I think it might have been banned from YouTube, but this guy Paul Joseph Watson,
I remember him.
and I think he was showing an older video, and it was about architecture, and it was basically about like that how they were destroying old buildings and they were building that brutalist style, and it was all about kind of it was it was different. It was the first time I'd ever really heard this, that saying like that when you see a beautiful building, there is something that obviously inspires you to more than you're doing now. It makes you feel a certain way, versus the brutalist style that literally the sight of it is oppressive. It's like like the inside of a prison is what it looks like. And then those buildings are treated poorly. The neighborhoods turn into disrepair, versus like you can imagine places that are beautiful, they get gentrified, right? People fix up older buildings and they make them look nice, because for one, they last for a long time if you treat them right.
Yeah.
Versus the stuff they built in the 60s and 70s that are just ugly, and they just demo them because they're ugly eyesores and they're worthless.
Yeah.
And but it's like this idea that those kind of ugly places beget ugly behavior, versus places that are beautiful that make you want to treat people better, because it's like there's something deep in us that knows that we're capable of more. And it really does feel like, especially in these days, that they want us to think we're capable of less. And obviously that's a self-fulfilling prophecy, is that people don't. It's like I said, why, like, it's the idea that if you could cook a steak versus go and get a cheeseburger that's really not even real meat, because it's easier and it's faster, and it probably costs about the same now. Like, you know what I mean? Like that.
What kind of meat are you talking about? No, sorry, we won't go there.
You know what I'm saying? Like that. That's like that. But yeah, like that. People would just rather just settle for just like the table scraps, versus like we're way more capable. And I do think that at this point, it's like it's pretty hard to imagine that people are going to wake up from that, unless like I said, unless they really know like what these people do not have our best interests, and they never have.
Yeah, I think we're all hoping for some sort of grand revelation where the normies all of a sudden wake up and you join us in our search for truth. I don't know how else to put it, but it can be very frustrating sometimes. They are trying to crush our spirits, but I think we find like-minded people, not so much in our daily lives as much as through this medium, I suppose, that we're using right now.
Well, it does feel like it's. I mean, it does feel like I'm noticing a shift. I mean, like I said, I don't want to be too tunnel vision, because obviously my platform's getting bigger. So, and I wasn't doing this a couple of years ago. So, like, obviously, there's at least one more person because of me, because that I'm that person, and I know a lot of people, my friends, that have very similar journeys, and we are, like I said, we are kind of peeling back the onion. And so we're all learning together. And I feel like it's kind of interesting that we're all kind of getting to the similar place, where that a lot of us probably the buildings, as I said, the funny thing was, like, I really became a conspiracy theorist when I started questioning the rocks. And I said, oh, I don't trust that rock anymore. It looks weird. Like, that doesn't look normal. And then, questioning the rocks and the buildings, the things that have always been right there. And like, so questions about how did the Grand Canyon get formed? Do you really believe that the Colorado River did that? And if it didn't, what did it? And why can't you go there? And like those kind of questions, like they don't seem that important, but the fact that they're lying about it is important. Again, that's why I always say, like, to think about, like, if you believe these things we're saying in this chat, you believe they've lied about something big. And if they lied about something this big, it's to cover up something even bigger. Because again, it makes no sense to burn buildings down, destroy buildings, to build lesser buildings, unless you're really trying to cover up like the crime of the crime, not the crime of the century, the crime of all time.
Of all time. Yeah. Yeah. I agree. That's well put, and I think that's a good place for us to end on. Um, I could chat with you for all night. Really, your insights are very valuable and enjoyable to listen to. So I appreciate you joining me here on my channel, JT.
Well, I appreciate it. I appreciate your audience for having me here to let me kind of just go on stream of consciousness and rant
Yeah,
about
it's
this stuff.
fun. I find it fun. Anything else you want to throw in before we sign off here?
No, I was just like I said, I would just encourage people, like I said, if you want to hear more about like what I was talking about, like the idea of like that Jesus came back and we're in this age of deception. I've got more content on that, and we're talking more about this stuff. And if you guys got, and of course, if you guys got anything in the chat that you want to shoot my way that kind of confirms some of the things I'm saying, please do that. I do feel like that the only way we're going to really get better at this stuff is to help each other, because I think, again, like as you've seen, I'm sure that you benefit greatly from the people who send you stuff, because like you could never research all this on your own.
It's a two-way street. This is how this works for sure. Yeah, I agree. Yeah. So you have a link tree, and you're on a bunch of different platforms, so people can check you out. I have the Instagram and the YouTube linked in the description, and I hope we could do this again sometime.
Absolutely, man. This was a blast. Like I said, if you if you guys just hit me up. Yeah, I'm JT follows JC on pretty much everything. I got a link tree. Instagram and YouTube, you can find me probably the most regularly, but I'm on pretty much everything that they haven't banned me off of yet.
All right, and I thank you all for joining us here tonight. And if you're watching the recorded version, I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you.
All right, God bless.
God bless.